So, hi guys, welcome back to this new episode of my podcast, Mancast Innit is the name of this podcast. Honestly, I appreciate every one of you. You have been so supportive. You have really been supportive. I've gotten calls, I've gotten messages. You guys are really out there rooting for me, and I appreciate this. First of all, I'd like to apologize because I understand that the first episode was I was actually told that it was too sad. It was so sad. It was so sad, and I am not trying to make sad podcasts. So I really hope that we have fun, that we enjoy, that it's not too sad. At least it's lively a little bit. So I will try very hard. Mental health issues are not funny. However, they are not sad, right? We can always find something to cheer us up as we continue to learn this. And I also was made to understand that the sound quality was not as good, and therefore going forward I am doing everything that I can to make sure that the sound quality is good, that we enjoy good sound quality, and feedback and concerns, sentiments, questions are welcome. Anytime you can reach me through my social media platforms. You can reach me through WhatsApp, through my Instagram. All this I'll be able to respond to you and any inquiries that you may have. Also, going forward, I be having guests come over, talk to us. We could have a dialogue, and so if any of you is interested in being a guest or participating in this podcast, maybe you're a professional, maybe you have gone through a certain experience that you want to share with us pertaining mental health, or maybe you're just out there and you have questions and you still want to be part of this podcast, you are welcome to be here and to just share this platform as we go ahead to learn more about mental health. Yes, so away from that, I am first of all very excited about this new podcast, and more so about this country, especially where mental health matters are at. I feel like we are starting to take mental health seriously. It's not like where we used to be before, I guess, or I'm feeling like we are actually getting to a place where we are appreciating that this thing is actually real, and mental health issues are challenges that could happen to anybody. So nobody of us is exempt to going through this issues. So honestly, we have a great future if we continue to take these things seriously, and more so, it's a cry out to the boy child that we as well will embrace who we are, will embrace that we actually need mental health solutions, because we are also human, right? And men don't talk about their issues. Men literally will swallow and just be tough and not want to feel emotions and not want to cry or share. But honestly, it is really helpful for a man to be able to know themselves and to discover that there is help, right? Yeah, so that said, today we are going to talk about childhood traumas. What are childhood traumas? What role do they play? Are they really a thing, or are we actually just overreacting out here? Because what is this? What are childhood traumas? What are some of the effects that they have? Can they actually affect us? I feel like this is a really deep topic and this conversation cannot just happen today and end. So we could have two episodes talking about this. So there'll be a first episode and a second one. So basically today we just try to dive in on the areas that childhood traumas could affect us. Yeah, so stay tuned. We are going to talk about this. Yeah, so as we were talking earlier about childhood traumas, we are going to try and understand what they are, the effects that they have on us, and hopefully on the second segment we'll be able to go deeper. So today we'll just touch on the surface and try to understand what they are and some of the effects that they may have on us, right? So the thing about childhood traumas, first of all, I'd like us to understand that these are not necessarily very extreme things that happen to us, because when I say childhood trauma, someone will think about rape, someone will think about physical violence, but they're not necessarily very extreme occurrences that could have happened. They cut across various things, and it also depends on how we process this information. Sometimes it's not as traumatic as we perceive it, because it's all in the processing. How are we processing the trauma? That's what determines whether it's going to have an effect on us or we're going to actually overcome it. So that is very important to know. Two, it is also important to know that when these traumas catch up with us, how we react, our actions, it is very sad that we may actually not know where these things are coming from. We might not even actually remember until we are able to sit down and say, oh, when I was growing up, this and this and this. Sometimes it is not very easy to trace back to where something came from. For instance, we might be very I'd say aggressive, or we could be afraid, or we could even have some form of PTSD or OCD that may have resulted from childhood trauma, and it has been so long that we are so used to living with it that we never actually got to understand where it came from. So that is something else that is important for us to understand. And three, in respect to two, just it's a follow-up of what we've said in step 2, is that people, or when we react out of trauma, or when our actions are trauma-based, sometimes we actually are not aware that we are being what we are being, in the sense that it's not our fault that we react the way we do. However, it is not, once we are able to realize that we are actually our behaviors are controlled or are as a result of childhood trauma or other traumas that are not necessarily childhood, it is our responsibility to do our best, to become better people, so that we are not constantly at a place where we keep referring to, oh, I did this because, when I grew up, this and this. Yes, we want to understand that. However, once we are able to know that, because many times we don't even know where it comes from. So once we're able to realize where our actions actually are rooted at, it is our responsibility to fix those things, so that we are not constantly being a burden to other people because we feel entitled that we have gone through traumas. However, not to downplay or make this topic light. Some traumas are actually very extreme. It takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of time, a lot of intervention for us to actually heal from these traumas. So it is not an easy thing. It's not like, yeah, I discovered that I'm like this, so now because it's my responsibility, by tomorrow I need to have stopped. You need to be very patient with yourself. We need to be very patient with ourselves. We need to be very optimistic. It's one day at a time, trying to fix those places. And sometimes we're not perfect, actually not sometimes, we are never perfect. Nobody's perfect. So we try to better ourselves so that we are not dragging other people into our issues and leaving them damaged. Are we trying to understand this? What I'm trying to say is, childhood trauma is real. It is not our fault that it happened to us, whatever it is. It is not necessarily a very traumatic event, but it is mostly based on our processing. And it is also our responsibility to ensure that we are becoming better once we are able to discover where our behavior originated from, why we're reacting the way we are. It is our responsibility. Just to add on, maybe being our responsibility also means that we are able to allow other people who spot our weaknesses or spot some of these negative traits that could have resulted from trauma. We need to allow other people to help us. When other people notice a certain behavior in us, it is important that we allow ourselves to be helped, so that we're not constantly being defensive, right? Because a trauma necessarily is not okay. It could be explained as a threatening occurrence. Yeah. So when a threatening occurrence happens, what your body does, that is gives a response to that trauma. It gives a response to that attack, to that threatening situation. And being a child, why these are called childhood traumas, is because being a child, our brains are still developing, so they're not fully developed. And the things that you pick up from childhood, the things that you pick up from childhood are very important. That's why it's so hard to learn things when you're grown. For instance, learning a new language. As a child, you don't actually sit through a class to learn your mother tongue or the language that you first started to speak. You don't necessarily sit through class and your mom or your dad or your guardian is teaching you, and you should say this, you should say this. Apana, it's not like that. It's you learn, you listen, you hear, you connect a certain sound to a certain meaning. Nobody teaches you. You connect that when someone says wacha, it means stop. When someone says kuja, it means come, and you associate that with the action, and that's how our brains begin to process and to gain information. And so when there is a traumatic event, our bodies go into defense mode. We've watched movies, we've seen how, especially sci-fi movies, if it's like a hideout, for villains, and there's like an attack, and there's the lockdown mode where like the windows close down and the doors, and there's like a defense system, guns and things just to protect that place. So that's how our bodies work. We go into defense mode. We try to protect ourselves. And growing up, we understand to protect ourselves sometimes comes through, it could be fighting, right? It could be frowning our faces to show that we're actually angry and we you want to fight. You want a piece of me, you want to fight me, so you like frown and get into that defense mode. And you could yell, because we know you are being attacked, you try to. So what happens is now our bodies begin to pick this as defenses, and whenever there's a trigger, our bodies go into this mode automatically. We don't even need to do anything. Some people will go into defense mode, other people will go into panic mode, right? There's defense mode and there's panic. You could either be very defensive, you could either be very afraid. It's called fright and fight mechanism. You become frightened, you want to go into defense mode. Other times you would literally crumble in fear. So that's how trauma works. And so, that being said, we could try and understand. Now we've seen that trauma is something that could have happened while you were growing up. It could be sexual abuse, could be physical abuse. You could be assaulted. Either growing up you had very strict parents, like African parents are very strict. We all know that, we are African. So we could have encountered some kind of beatings. They were not necessarily abuse, but again, it's in the processing. Some people are just beaten for discipline, but again, the way they processed it, how we process it is what actually matters. There's literally physical abuse where you actually physically assaulted, maybe at school, maybe at home. There could be sexual abuse, either you've been raped, and that would trigger a certain response when you see someone or something that reminds you of that time. And the thing is, it might not necessarily remind you of that time, because sometimes our brains, when the occurrence is too traumatic, our brains have the ability to actually remove that part of the memory that remembers about that. That's why you'll find if there's a traumatic event, for instance, maybe a bombing or a mass shooting, and the victims might be asked what happened, they literally say they don't remember what happened. They just found themselves on the ground, or maybe a kidnapping. Some of these people are not able to remember or recount what happened during that period. Why? Because when there's a lot of trauma, our brains tend to want to suppress that memory, and therefore we might not even remember. And that's why we said it's actually sad, because we might be acting out of something that we can't even remember, or that we can't even trace back to, that this is it. And therefore things like sexual abuse could have devastating effects on our behavior, in the sense that we become defensive when we see something, or go into panic mode when we see something or an event that our brains subconsciously remember. So we either go into a certain state, all of a sudden you're afraid, you go into deep anxiety, right? And you break down. Maybe you're crying and you can't even explain why you're crying. Maybe you're just afraid and you can't even understand why you're afraid, right? The other one could be from witnessing domestic violence. Maybe some of us growing up, maybe there was a lot of violence at home, maybe from our parents, maybe our neighbors would fight, and we witnessed some of these things. This could actually trigger as a form of trauma in our brains. And yeah, these things are really strange because they affect us for a lifetime and they were not even our fault. You know, we just happened to be there when it affects you. And so that's why it's important to actually, once you able to realize that you have been through childhood trauma and you're able to actually trace back to what it was, it's important that now you start to seek help to how you can be able to manage it, because the sad thing is it continues to affect us and to affect us, and the consequences follow us for a lifetime, because especially when it's not worked upon. We could have been bullied in school. Maybe there's that one kid who used to pick on you and beat you up, or a certain group of people would actually gossip about you in class, or a certain teacher would look down upon you and say things about you. And at the time, being a child, we don't even understand the impact of these things. Yeah, they're very deep. Just being made fun of. Sometimes we'd make fun of other kids, but it's again in the processing. How do they process this? Some people will take it to heart. These people hate me, and they grow up feeling rejected, and they try out things in life, but they never work. And you wonder why. Because growing up, this child grew up with the mentality that I am not wanted. Maybe their parents told them growing up that, you are a mistake, or I shouldn't have given birth to you. And so this child growing up, subconsciously, they don't even remember that particular incident, but their brain picked it up and stored it. And our brain is like it continually programs itself. We are a clean slate. We are literally like a memory card when you are born that is empty, and we start to feed into that memory card information. And so what we pick is what our brain controls how we are. So when we pick that we are unwanted, growing up, this child cannot keep a job, this child cannot keep a relationship, this child cannot keep money. They're literally trying things and they're not working. Why? Because in their brain, subconsciously picked, I am unwanted. So what's the point? And they try so hard to do things, but because their brain has been conditioned to believe that they are unwanted, the outcome is things that are unwanted, right? It could be violence in school. You could have witnessed violence, maybe from a robbery, maybe you witnessed someone being raped, maybe you witnessed a murder, or maybe you saw a dead body, right? Again, the processing comes in. How do you process trauma? Some people will see it, they'll be okay with it, they will never remember about it again, and it won't affect them. But others, it's again how we've been built, right? It could also be from a natural disaster. Maybe there was a flooding, it was very traumatic. Could be an accident. Maybe you got into a very fatal accident, and it's been there, and maybe there's this fear every time you get into a matatu or into a car that an accident is going to happen. And maybe you have to, mostly accidents will lead someone into an OCD pattern, because now you try to avoid things that your brain thinks could have made that accident happen in the first place. So maybe if that accident happened where you're sitting in the front seat, you'll be afraid of sitting in the front seat. You'll always sit in the back seat. Maybe it happened when the seat belt was untied, so you have to put on your seat belt. Maybe it happened you had not eaten breakfast that morning, so every time you travel, if you haven't eaten breakfast and you find yourself in a car, you are scared. You feel like this accident will happen, something bad will happen, because I have not observed a certain criteria of doing things. I have not eaten breakfast. Maybe I sat in the front seat, and you become a slave to certain things. Maybe I could call them rituals. You feel that you need to do something in a certain way so that something bad does not happen. You feel like you need to maybe say a prayer 3 times. If you don't say it 3 times, something bad will happen. You feel like you need to wash your hands before you go to bed, because the day you did not wash your hands, something bad happened. So we carry that trauma, and it might lead to those OCD patterns. And as well as PTSD. PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, which usually happens. It could be from childhood trauma, it could be from trauma even as a grown-up. When you witness a very traumatic event like an accident or something just bad happens to you or to someone else and you witness it, you may have a certain fear. Maybe if you hear a gunshot or that sound, if you hear something loud that sounds like a gunshot, you completely go into a panic mode, or you completely go into a defense mode where you want to fight, or you just scared, and for a moment you lose yourself. You may not understand where you are. Yeah. So that's trauma for us. That's how trauma acts, and that's why I said it could be very deep. We may not be able to exhaust enough, but we'll be able to cover what we want, what we need to. What we need to. You could have lost a loved one growing up, maybe a parent, or a family member, or a friend, and that pain may have caused you not to process that event, and so constantly we might suffer from that, right? So the signs of childhood trauma, basically there are many. There are so many signs of childhood trauma. Basically childhood trauma is a combination of nature and nurture. Nature in the sense that our genes, how we process things, how we are able to carry things, right? And nurture, how we were brought up, the environment that we lived in, the people that we interacted with, the things that we witnessed while growing up. So all these factors bring this combination. That's why it varies from one person to another. That's why some people lose their parents who are very young, and they'll grow up and they'll have no issues, and they just go on well with life, while others will lose it. Again, the processing comes in. So PTSD will be one of those major things that follow childhood trauma. There could be a lot of anxiety. Sometimes you're just anxious. You're afraid something bad is going to happen. You don't know what is going to happen. You're just afraid. There's avoidance. And once you get into this spot, you don't want to be around other people. You feel like either you're being a problem to other people, or you just don't want to be around people. You just want to be alone. There could be depression. You could have a very prolonged period of depression, especially when there's a trigger, when something happens that might remind your brain of what happened. There could be depression. There could be a lot of anger. Sometimes we find ourselves very angry over very minute things. Things are very small that are not worthy to be angry over, but we find ourselves very angry. So when we check properly, you could find that somewhere growing up, we may have experienced a certain trauma that triggers this response. Because again, defense or panic. So we are either being defensive. When we feel we are being attacked, we become very defensive. So we are angry, we can be very anxious, we can be avoidant, or we could go into panic. We could literally shut down and we are not able to say anything. Yes, so these things they're deep. Could have flashbacks, there could be nightmares at night. So PTSD happens like this. There could be self-destructive behaviors. These are very wide, you know. Sometimes we could find that someone who's gone through trauma like rape, they might find themselves going in the line of prostitution because their brain, there's a syndrome where someone gets attached to the abuser. Why am I forgetting this? I'll say it. I guess I hope I'll remember it in the course of the podcast. So these people they feel like going that direction is safe for them because being abused, maybe they were raped, and that's why it is important not to be judgmental. Because some of the things that we see today that might not be very pleasing, it's not people's faults. They just found themselves in these things. And so it is our part, now that we know these things, to be of assistance. When you see people struggling with things, it is not for us to judge, it is for us to be of help. And things like destructive behavior, I was talking about prostitution, right? People go into prostitution and we are like, these people are perverts, they should not be in the society, what is wrong with them? But when we search deeply, even when they look into their lives deeply, you'll find that there's something that happened, and our brain forms a safe haven in a bad behavior. It could be alcoholism, it could be drug abuse, it could be compulsive lying, right? It's also it becomes a defense mechanism because we want to protect ourselves. So we find that we have a habit of lying, and lying even when we shouldn't lie. And we are like, why did I even have to lie about this? But it could be something in our childhood trauma, that caused a trauma that is causing us to react in a certain way. And these things are sad, again, like I said, because until we know about them, we are constantly wondering what is wrong with us. Why do I react like this? Why am I unable to sustain a job, for instance? Why can't I sustain a relationship, for instance? And we begin to see that childhood trauma plays a huge role in our behavior. We might do things that are not pleasant to other people because we become defensive, maybe when we feel attacked, maybe when we feel abandoned. We didn't even talk about this. There's abandonment trauma, fear of being abandoned. Maybe growing up, we were abandoned by our parents, or there's this one person that we trusted and they left. And so our brain creates a certain program. We are programmed in a certain way where we are constantly afraid of being abandoned, right? And there's this anxiety, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of negativity that may come out of it because we are constantly trying to keep people that we love around us, and we constantly feel like they're going to leave, right? And this also becomes a problem. And so these things are really, really, really deep. So it's important to understand where maybe if we have certain traits, that come out in certain environments, maybe sit down and try understand, why did I react like this? Why do I act like this? Why do I say certain words? Why do I go into defense mode? Why do I go into panic mode? Why do I do these things? So emotionally, this may affect us. We talked about anger, we talked about anxiety, depression. There's an inability to express our emotions. There's withdrawal, we said anger, we said frustration. So our emotions become very mixed up, right? And so it could also lead to physical health problems like asthma. When you go to a panic attack, your airways are blocked and you're not able to breathe properly, so it could be a problem, right? So asthma, there could be stroke, diseases like diabetes. All these problems could arise from childhood trauma. So it is important that we understand these things. We understand that it is real. We understand that people act the way they do, not because they want to at times. Of course, sometimes we're just ignorant and we act. But other times, it's important, especially if it's a certain pattern we find ourselves in, it's important to try analyze and see, where did this come from? Why do I react? Or why do I act the way I do? And that said, we are able to find help. That is the beginning of help. Now we acknowledge and accept, okay, I have trust issues, for instance. So get that problem. I have trust issues. Where did they come from? Why do I have trust issues? When I grew up, what could have happened? So once you're able to trace that, now that's where you seek help. You could talk to a counselor, you could talk to a friend that you trust so much. Of course, not just anybody, because of trust issues, right? You don't trust anybody. So that's where it starts. It starts from understanding where you are, understanding what the problem is, and then going back to the problem. And finally, now that we said growing up, some people may have hurt us, right? Or we could have experienced traumas and we might blame other people because of those traumas. I am like this because my parents fought while I grew up. I am like this because I was abandoned by my parents. Or I am like this because I was abused. Let us also understand that for us to again overcome these things, we need to forgive. I know that is a very sensitive thing. You can't just say forgive. You're asking me why. How will I forgive an animal that abused me? How will I forgive someone that clearly has destroyed my life? People that are abusers, let me just put this out there, are also abusers because they were abused many times. People that hurt other people have been hurt, right? And so it is important for us not to blame people when they hurt us, not to recount and recall and point fingers at people. When we were growing up, they hurt us, they did this to us, I'm like this because this and this happened to me. Those same people could be in the position you are in right now. Maybe they were also abused. Maybe they were also abandoned. Maybe they were also bullied. And maybe they have issues at home. Even growing up, children that grew up bullying other children, if we focus, very well, we'll find that at home they may have issues. And so his outlet is by bullying others, where he feels he needs to express his presence. He wants to be felt, because at home he's not felt. He's not listened to clearly. He's not important at home. At home he's actually mistreated. At home he's quiet. He cannot express how strong he is. And so these are some of the problems that other people may face. And they might pass them on to other people. They might pass them on to other people, not because they want to. Maybe that's the only way they know how to. And it's a wrong way, of course, but yeah, we find that a condescending attitude towards other people. So I hope we have picked something from today's episode. I would want us to conclude here, but this is not over. We'll continue to dive deeper and see. Maybe next time we'll have questions. I hope we'll have questions next time, and also see if we can dive a little bit more deeper and see how childhood traumas may affect us. Right. So I am really happy that you took time to listen to this podcast, and hopeful that it's going to help us. I'm also learning things throughout this podcast, and so yeah, I'm really excited to see where this goes. So guys, thank you so much for listening in. Hope to see you next time. Goodbye.